Good afternoon, everyone. So we got a very interesting session now, and that is going to be a panel discussion. And we got three councils represented today, and they cover the whole spectrum of the UK. So the one is from Wales. So I would like to invite Beth Parker. And Beth Parker is our green infrastructure project manager at the Neath Port Talbot City Council. Then we have Felicity Harris from England, and she is Green and Healthy City Coordinator from Portsmouth City Council. And we have Anna Parks from Scotland, and she's Biodiversity Officer at Falkirk City Council. So nice to have all of you here today. Yeah. So how we're going to run this session is I've got a few questions which I'm going to ask them to provide some comments on them. I've got three questions basically. So there are two options there. The one is that after each question, then you have an opportunity to ask questions from our panelists, or I can go through my questions, and in the end we have time to take the questions there, right? Maybe we'll do in the end, right? I could see a little bit of nodding there. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. So I believe that, I remember the last panel sessions we had where the people were saying that there was very little to say because the other two have already covered. So I really don't know where to start with. But what we'll do is we'll take the turn from here, and then next time we can take from there. And the third time we can start from center, right? So everyone has got equal opportunity. So I guess the whole idea of this panel discussion is to understand from the council's perspective that what you see, the challenges when it comes to the implementation of the green blue infrastructure. And you are the key people who are really taking the science and the policies onto the ground. So first question from for is what are the challenges in implementing green and blue space infrastructure in your town or city or in your area? So, Felicity, do you want to open up?
Yeah, so I'm with Portsmouth City Council. We're about 40 kilometres squared and a population of 210,000. So we're one of the most densely populated urban areas in England. So space is obviously a challenge, but we can't do anything about space. So that isn't my main challenge. I think probably because we're so densely populated, our challenge then moves into how we develop a narrative around green blue infrastructure, how we prioritise where we focus, and how we build partnerships for collaboration. Because as a local authority, we can't do it alone. We don't have the land. So therefore, we need to bring everybody on that journey with us, whether they're sort of stakeholders who may own more land or whether they're individuals. So I think our challenge is around building positive relationships that point in the same direction, having the benefit of time to do that, but also recognising that we need to respond in an urgent way.
Thank you.
So I'm from Neath Port Talbot Council. For those of you who don't know, Neath Port Talbot is southwest Wales. It's a kind of urban/rural area. You've probably seen it on the news because of Port Talbot Steelworks being closed down. Mm-hmm. So I think at the moment, one of our biggest challenges is the fact that Port Talbot Steelworks, which supplies so many jobs, is being pegged as this new change into the green industry. And so bringing our community with us is how do we make them care about climate change, about nature, about changing the urban space into something which is more green. And then other aspects that we're facing in terms of challenging is funding, which I'm sure my other two members of councils will tell you the exact same. And bringing people with us, getting sign-off from our internal officers and councillors to agree that we need to change the way that we do things, and bring in, it's not even a new way of thinking, just bringing this difference in how we do things forwards and changing the way that we look at urban spaces and urban design.
Thank you. So this is very complementary to what you said, Felicity. Yes, Anna.
Hi, so I work for Falkirk Council, which is a council in central Scotland, with a real mix of rural and urban, with the extreme being Grangemouth, which you may have heard of for the refinery, so the whole sort of gamut of land use types there. This is going to sound very familiar. I guess I've just picked out a few of the challenges we face. I think we're very much looking at the land that we have control of and how we improve that in terms of climate, biodiversity, well-being, climate resilience. But there are so many multiple benefits that we have to get out of each pocket of land that we have control of. Those bits of land have to work really hard for climate, biodiversity, water management, sport, dog walking. So that can be a really tricky balancing act. I guess public needs, public expectations, public perceptions vary dramatically. And sometimes public perception isn't particularly positive towards some green-blue infrastructure initiatives. So that's something that we really have to work hard on in terms of listening, but also educating and raising awareness. And that goes for internally within the council as well. So you mentioned that, but actually change is hard. And we have to take people along with us, and that's councillors, and that's team members, that's colleagues, that's the chap on the mower who's out there mowing your hard delivered meadow. So that's challenging. And resources, you won't be surprised to hear. Money and people are spread thin, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, so I could see that everyone wants money, right? So the funding is something which is a key kind of enabler to get this kind of, the implementation. But I think you mentioned about the space, and you touched upon that, using the unused space and turning it into the, the more kind of usable. And I guess the other thing you mentioned, which was really interesting, is the perception of the people, because sometimes they do not understand the benefits, or there is a push actually of getting something done in the wrong direction. I remember an example of Guildford, where I was talking with the council, and they got a really old big tree right in the city centre, and the idea was that they wanted to cut down the tree, and they were even offering that they could do a lot more trees to present it, but there was a lot of the voice against it. But sometimes those infrastructure, if they're not put at the right location or the right place, so they could damage the building, they could have a lot of the other impacts. So I think this the point you made about using the land, but also thinking about what type of green infrastructure, the blue spaces are the best for particular areas, is quite important.
Yeah.
So I think I will move on to my second question, and thank you for your patience. But keep your questions ready to fire after that. The second question really is about what would you consider a particularly successful green and blue infrastructure project, or kind of the activities you might have done in your town or area, and what you think made it successful. Maybe we can start with you this time.
Certainly, yep. Well, in Falkirk, we've been delivering what we're now calling our Spaces for Nature project, which aims to enhance green spaces managed by the council to deliver benefits for biodiversity and nature, but also for climate and for physical and mental well-being, and also to do it efficiently and within the resources that we have available to us. So no mean feat. So we started that back in 2020 as a pilot, taking 35 sites that were mainly short amenity grass that ranged from road verges, industrial estates, parks, other green spaces, and putting in interventions like meadows, naturalised long grass, orchards, native woodland, spring bulbs. And we did a lot of sort of data gathering and analysis of that process as we trialled it, so that at the end of it, we could really demonstrate that it had significant benefits for biodiversity at these sites, but also improved carbon sequestration, increased climate resilience of the sites, improved the sort of amenity of the sites, made them more varied and interesting for people to use. And that's a project that we're still working on. I guess the key success of that, it was very much trial. We were checking to see if it worked. The big success was that off the back of that, we've had approval from the council to roll that sort of more sustainable management out across most of our other remaining green spaces. And in terms of sort of why that's been successful, I mean, part of it was because we used our knowledge and experience to pick interventions that we had a strong feeling were going to have positive benefits. But most importantly, we trialled it at scale. So we did it across a lot of sites, and we recorded really carefully what the costs and benefits were, what the impacts were. We worked across council teams. So like I was saying before, from everyone from the managers right down to the critical guy on that lawnmower were involved in the project, and they were all sort of pulling in the same direction and working together. So that was really important. We did a lot of community consultation and getting views while we were delivering the project. And we were willing to hold our hands up when we got things slightly wrong and learn from that and make changes during the delivery phase. So that's been a really positive project for us, and we're still going with it.
So what type of green blue infrastructure is this, the plant you are putting, or landscaping the areas? What type of work it involved?
It varied from site to site, and that was critical, that it was designed to be appropriate for the particular site. So for some sites, it could simply be a change in the cutting regime on the site and just turning it from really short grass and desert to more naturalised grass. On other sites, it was a whole mixture of interventions like planting native woodland, creating community orchards, sowing in new meadow and planting nectar-rich spring bulbs. But it was very much on a sort of site-by-site basis what we did.
So it's more like bespoke solutions for the problem rather than one thing fits all kind of approach, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Beth?
So I think I mentioned before that, we've got a particular issue with people signing off, people seeing kind of tangible evidence of what green infrastructure is. So we started in 2021 as a team. We were in kind of conceived from a grant. And from there, we realised that we kind of needed to put tangible examples in the community of small-scale green infrastructure that didn't necessarily look, like a big multi-million-pound project where we're greening up an entire urban space. What we're doing is showing people that you can do this on a small scale. You can even do this yourself. And by putting it in multiple spaces and spreading it across areas, you're then having similar impacts as if you were doing one large project. So some of the tangible examples included, we put very glamorously a green roof bin stores in a local park. So they had a really big refuse issue, which was being vandalised and had issues with pests. So we put in bespoke green roof bin storage, which was enclosed, but it had habitats around the outside of it, wildflower roof on the top with wildflower meadows, local native plants, which connected to planters that we built. And it's really visual because it's in the visitor centre of the park, straight in front of where people walk in every day. Other examples, we put a green roof bus stop in Aberavon, which is a really wonderful beach right next to the steelworks in Port Talbot. And this bus shelter, we had real issues with suppliers wanting to give us kind of like seed and mat green roofs, stuff that wasn't necessarily biodiversity beneficial, didn't have native species. And so we worked with a supplier to design an actual wooden green roof bus stop. Marine grade wood supposedly will last exactly the same length of time, if not longer, than aluminium. So we're breaking conventions with that and putting it in outside of a residential care home. We've got another green roof retrofitted onto a bench shelter in a similar area. So looking at like changing areas of the community to show the public that you can think of your spaces differently, to inspire them to think of where spaces for nature actually can be, especially in urban areas. And then we've done 2 different green walls in community centres in Port Talbot. So these are like community hubs. One's the Harlequins Rugby Football Club. Big up the Harlequins. And that's in Old Aberavon, so it's a really socially deprived area of Port Talbot. And we put a plant box system green wall on that building. And we're involving, which is really important to us, but I think also really important to community engagement projects, we're involving local artists in that. Port Talbot has a massive art scene. We used to have a Banksy back in the day. We did sell it. And so, yeah, involving artists and involving the community in that is bringing that kind of sense of pride, but also like making that space look nice with, outside of doing a green wall, making it a space for nature by making those murals biodiversity focused or continuing that level of greening. And we're doing training outside of that. We're training the local community in why the green wall is important. We're training them to maintain it. We're launching it. And every day when they go to a rugby game, they see that green wall. And in a similar aspect, Talbot Community Centre, which is literally, the train line is directly behind it. And then there's a blast furnace behind that. We put a wire trellis green wall there. And so that's just a really simple climbing plant green wall. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive. And when we use that space now as our kind of training hub and our engagement hub, and we also do meadow days and we manage the meadow there as well. So it's all about this kind of community involvement on a small scale to show people these tangible examples. But as well, it works for our internal departments who may not necessarily sign off on the fact that these things work, because here they are working in the community. Here they are retrofitted onto old buildings. They can't tell us that it doesn't work or, you know, push this into place, and it brings councillors along with them. And that's led to now we're doing a project where we're regreening underneath the M4 in Port Talbot. So if you've ever seen Port Talbot, the M4 cuts straight through it. There's some pillars that people have literally the view of underneath the M4. And so we're putting green screens up, we're doing murals, we're putting lighting in, we're putting a wildflower meadow. So all of these examples are getting bigger as we go along. So hopefully that may continue.
Wow, that is a lot, actually.
Yeah.
That's a lot happening, guys. It looks to me that there is a call, actually, to go and visit.
Yeah, come to Port Talbot. It's really nice, yeah.
And I particularly like the green roof bins, you know. So,
yeah, yeah.
I like to have one in my house.
That whole ugly, lovely aspect of, you know, Swansea and Port Talbot. Yeah.
These are possibly the you know, not the very nice looking things, you know, when you come to the bins. They haven't evolved much, you know, over the years. So that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
It will also be interesting to see whether the councils, when they pick up the bins, whether they can maintain actually that lid.
Yeah.
Or somehow there could be like a topping, actually, you can take it off and you put it back when they have taken the bin out.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's very interesting, yeah, thank you.
No worries.
Okay, so Felicity.
I walked through Portsmouth on my way up to school the other day, and I walked through one of our large social housing estates in the middle of the city centre, Buckland, and we have a fantastic housing and neighbourhoods team. And what the guy that leads that estate team has been doing in Buckland, which has no accessible green spaces of any real size, what he's been doing is kind of defragmenting the spaces by depaving old laundry courts and walkways and knitting together spaces by changing mowing regimes, introducing trees for cooling. And I got a real sense of tranquility as I walked through that area. It's surrounded by major roads. It was quiet, it was peaceful, it was pretty, and it felt safe. It's also, hopefully, we're going to be working with some of your colleagues to understand the benefits a bit more. But what's been really good is we've talked about money and finance. So Phil hasn't had the money to do this all at once. So he developed a kind of master plan and a vision a few years back. And he's been gradually rolling it out. And I think you talked about building on what you learned, and Phil's been able to do that with his team, get that feedback from the community, understand what's worked, what hasn't worked. And, you know, because we've got lots of these types of housing estates in Portsmouth, it's a kind of model I hope we can pick up and move to another area. But I think in terms of, you talked about how important it is to see the difference, to see the benefits, you really can in that area.
Fantastic. I think it's a range of activities. I think there is a lot to learn from each other in the sense of, because these are quite bespoke solutions to the particular areas as well. And especially some of the areas you mentioned, Beth, related to the bins or the M3 or M4. These are really ugly places actually when you go through those roundabouts. So you not only get lost on the roads, but also you don't see anything which can console you a little bit there. So these are fantastic ideas there. I think I'm going to move on to my last question. Again, my apologies for keeping you waited, but hopefully it will be soon, your turn now. So how did you decide how and when to involve the local community in your green and blue projects? I think we'll start with you, Beth, this time.
I think for us it's really difficult because we're working on like a grant funding cycle. So it's often a march to a march, and you've got to get, potentially planning applications through and get the consultants or the contractors on board and run it all across. So it's really difficult for us to do that kind of really big initial placemaking and place building thing that we would love to do as we work on projects which are kind of really piecemeal and year-long approaches. But we've been making sure that we involve the community kind of in that early level of design stage. So we've got that concept, those rough ideas, and we're taking that to the community and we're running engagement events with them where we're inviting them to come along and talk to us about their areas. We're also kind of meeting them where they are, which I think is a really important thing because we've had, as I think another presenter mentioned earlier, poor turnout to those kind of events. And so we're trying to now go out into the community, meet them where they are, join on to events that are already happening, go out onto the seafront at half term and things like that to be there with them and engage them at a more constant level than just the stuff we're delivering. So that they're aware. But I think the real difficulty for us is that the public aren't necessarily fully interested in nature at this point in time in terms of what's happening with the steelworks, and so we're trying to make it, as again the presentation on Stanley earlier mentioned, talking to them about how it benefits them as a community, not just the fact that it benefits nature. Like, why is this important to them? And again, that's kind of meeting them where they are. So how is this going to improve your daily life? So for the project underneath the M4, for example, we're talking about lighting to improve safety.
Yep.
We're talking about getting local artists involved to create murals. But then and where I think is a really good space to bring the community into your projects, is doing stuff that isn't conventionally to do with the natural aspects of the project. So particularly Swansea Council, I know, have just done a honeycomb sea wall, and they had so many more people attend their engagement event because they invited them to paint the honeycomb wall. So they had a crazy amount of different people attending. And similar to us, we're getting the community along to paint some of those pillars for the M4, so we're trying to do similar things to that. So it's kind of enticing them in with something that they're interested in, which isn't necessarily nature-based, and then bringing them along and educating them at that point in time to show them how it's important and why it's important. And again, the biggest people who sign up to everything we do nature-wise are always the kids, the schools, the families that come. The kids are always the most engaged. And so, that's going to take a long time to develop from them being 10 years old to them being house owners, but still, it's a really important aspect of what we're doing.
Yeah, but I believe that it also generates the sense of belongings if they participate in the process.
Definitely.
Like when you're passing through, oh, I did that. So that sort of thing is very important because you start caring, you start thinking, you become like the ambassador of those things by yourself.
Yeah.
And telling others, look, this is a fantastic thing to do. Yeah, thank you. Go next to you then.
Pardon me. Well, I guess traditionally in the past, we've very much consulted communities and members of the public on a project-by-project basis and at that sort of early project development stage. The Spaces for Nature project was different in that we wanted to trial it at scale across lots of sites, and there was a sort of urgency about it, both in terms of taking urgent action for nature and for climate, but also in terms of capitalising on a sort of shift in public and councillor attitudes towards more naturalised green space management. So we took the decision actually to run public engagement and consultation at the same time as project delivery, sort of in tandem right the way through the project. So we did a large-scale public consultation, and most crucially, we involved people in actually delivering that trial. So they were part of the trial of these new techniques and enhancements. And we had sort of 400 plus volunteers out doing all manner of planting in both sunshine and snow. And it was fantastic to get the range of people we did out participating in the trial, finding out what we were doing, feeling like they were part of it, feeling like they were taking positive action. And one of the really strong messages that came out of that pilot project was the need for that engagement and the need for participation and education. And actually going forward, we're doing a lot more in terms of environmental activity sessions on our project sites where people can come and learn about the site both before and after our interventions, more interpretation, more sort of branding of our sites. So that's come out as a really key must-have to these green infrastructure changes, that we keep on with that education and engagement.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're kind of on the start of our journey in Portsmouth. Obviously, we've been doing lots of little things for a while, but we had our sort of greening strategy, which really sort of set the ambition, high-level ambitions for the city, approved by Cabinet in October. And as that started to bed down, what with sort of the kind of direction of travel for us, it's still early days, is very much almost taking a public health life course approach. So we're thinking about places where people live, places where people receive care, places where people spend their leisure time, and places where people work. So we're hoping to engage people in those settings on that journey over time, because as my colleagues have pointed out, we're not having sort of enough capital to deliver lots of things at scale. So earlier in the year, we went out to all the schools in Portsmouth, and we wanted to gain an understanding from teachers of their lived experience of hotter weather conditions and how they were using school grounds, but also sort of what other things they noticed around air quality and surface water flooding. So that's given us an opportunity. A third of our schools responded to that questionnaire. That's given us an opportunity to then go out to schools to start to meet pupils. So, and I'm really excited. So I'm going to talk about one project we're kicking off. We're kicking off lots of projects for schools, but one project we're kicking off in a large primary school in the centre of Portsmouth. 2 pupils took us around the site, absolutely outraged that when it's really hot, they can't get out and play, and this is really bad for us, then pointed to the big lake on their only tiny bit of green space in the school playground, and said, we can't even use that because it's always flooded in winter, and we don't have armbands. And so this kind of real voice came through, and they were sort of really, really aware we need somewhere that's shady. So we went and looked at a strip of trees on the edge. The school's sort of situated on a corner of 2 main roads. And a teacher said, well, we used to do forest school here, but we can't hear when we're delivering forest school in this area. It got like overgrown. We're aware that it's got there's high levels of pollution down that end. So the kind of conversation led to an informed design wish list. Our landscape architect team have been involved. We've gone back to the school. We're working with the caretakers, and I guess that sort of demonstrates potentially our sort of direction of travel in Portsmouth, with that kind of place-based lived experience. Bringing that voice forward. So what is it like? How are you experiencing these issues? And therefore, how can you be involved in, or how can we involve you and support you change this setting? And we're also through that developing we've got some public health HDRC funding, my colleagues have, and we're going to be trialling a toolkit with some of the pupils to understand more how schools are dealing with heat events. So that's kind of the approach we're taking. But I think there's something for me about putting a personality to these problems, putting a face to the
Perfect.
problems.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I will not speak anything now. So I will give the floor to our audience to ask questions from our panelists. Okay, one here.
Hi there. I was just wondering how the different policies within planning help you deliver green brew infrastructure in the different authorities, and particularly thinking with you, Beth, about being a SUDS approval body and how that's kind of maybe changed things over the last period.
Yeah, I mean, planning-wise, there's a lot of kind of noise in Welsh Government planning policy, so there's lots of words to talk about green infrastructure. It's not necessarily it's not like a forced thing that you have to do, but it's a nice to have. It is great that it's in there, but we'd love to see some kind of more push into driving it forwards as a consideration. There's some really great planning tools out there that look at like what your existing kind of green space is and how you can build on that, and calculations, which I think are really useful for people who are developing sites to improve their biodiversity and improve their space. We really struggle to get developers to agree to have green roofs. Green walls are, I think, much better approved by people, seen as much less of a kind of scary thing to do. There's some kind of aspect that people think green roofs fail, but it's not actually the green roof that fails, it's the roof underneath the green roof that fails on retrofits, and so it's trying to get rid of that kind of idea in people's heads. And in terms of the SUDS Advisory Board, Wales is kind of leading the way in that any development over a certain size has to have a SUDS aspect to it. It can't add surface water into the system. And so I think that they're working really well. Neath Talbot has a really good model and a really good SUDS Advisory Board. I know I'm bigging us up, but I don't actually work on that too. But it's just trying to get that right. All of this stuff that we're doing. It's not new, as I said before. It's not new technologies or new techniques. And it seems like all of the councils are trying to do it individually and in silos, and we all have to do it ourselves. Whereas in actuality, there's loads of really successful SUDS schemes across the UK, across Wales. Cardiff have got Greener Grange Town, which is really wonderful. And so it's kind of learning from those examples. And we went on a really good tour of Greener Grange Town with the people who delivered it. And so, that's kind of us trying to get our SARBS team and the SARBS teams in Wales to understand what is the right method, the best practice, and making sure that that's what developers are implementing. Because, when you get a developer implementing SUDS, there's some in Neath Town Centre, and they're really not the best in terms of how they look or what they actually achieve in terms of drainage. And so, we don't want to see those examples out there. We want to see good things. I'll open it up to anyone else.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we have a question from this side.
Hello, I'm Julia Thrift from the Town and Country Planning Association and the Green Infrastructure Partnership. Thank you for your very helpful and interesting comments. Some of what you're trying to do is quite new and experimental, and you've said that you learnt from things as you went along, or the people working on projects have done. Councils are often criticised if they don't get things right first time. I get told, you just spent all that money on this thing and it didn't work. Are you finding that's a problem, and how are you getting around that, if you are?
Shall I start?
Yes.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It can be really challenging, and I think there's always people ready to say that's not worked. You've made the wrong decision. I think that comes back to how we explain to communities what we're doing. And I think if we can be open that we're working with them, hopefully, to identify potential solutions to lots of issues and delivering projects, but they might not be perfect, and it's a learning process for everybody. I think that's just really important for us as local authorities to be open about that from the start, so that we're not marching in there saying we've got the solution to what we perceive to be your problem. I guess we're asking then for trouble if it's not the solution, and they're going to come back and tell us it's not the solution. So I guess the onus is on us as local authority to communicate more clearly about what we're aiming to do and how we're hoping to do it, and how we will respond and adjust and learn from things if they don't work quite as we anticipated. And hopefully we're learning that lesson and we're doing that.
Anything you wanted to add, Beth or Felicity?
I think there's something, in one of the questions, both of you talked about change, and I think there's something about being able to frame this as a change, as starting to do things differently. That reflective cultures is very important, and I think that communication is really important. So, for example, with I mean, yesterday I had 2 people talking to me about trees and saying, right, we need to get the, because of low air quality, we need to get the carbon dioxide off the streets and the carbon monoxide off the streets, and equating, well, if we take a big tree down, we need to, and I think, or people complaining that sort of understandably that trees perhaps haven't survived in some locations. And I think there's something, if we just take sort of the tree narrative, I think there's something about getting that narrative, it's illustrative of how we need to get narrative right, and actually how listening to, whether it's a complaint or a query or something people aren't happy about, often actually it's just revealing perhaps different perceptions or different levels of understanding. So I think there's something about being quite agile with communication strategies or communications approaches, and quite nimble, so that that it's an education. We're all being educated together, aren't we?
I think I would just add to that all and say, honesty is the best policy. We don't want to be seen as making lots of mistakes, because we are. I mean, I'm not necessarily spending public money because I'm grant funded, but I mean, as a council, we are spending public money, and so we don't want to be wasting lots of public money on mistakes. So, like, first and foremost, it's trying, as both of my colleagues have said, trying to design with the area in mind, make it multifunctional, look at best practice, learn from what other people are doing. But in reality, mistakes are going to be made. As a particular example for us, we replaced an ornamental garden with a wildflower meadow garden on the seafront, planted some turf in the areas that had been tracked over, and then had one of the biggest, driest springs we've ever had. Could not keep up with the watering, and the turf died. And the public perception of that, we had lots of complaints, and we, made sure that we put on social media, that we posted interpretation in the area, and also, kind of owned up to the fact this mistake has happened, and also, the weather has happened, which is, ultimately, as we are all seeing, are out of our control, because springs aren't the same as they once were, neither are summers, neither are winters, and just kind of rectified the issue at the appropriate time, which was much later on in the year when we could put turf down and it would survive. So it's that level of honesty, and also that level of kind of preparation at the front end that is a balance that we're trying to keep as a council.
So the honesty is the best policy.
Yeah.
Answer here, and keep the communication clear. I think we have got another question, and there is one, I guess, on the back,
okay.
One here.
Thank you very much for these fantastic discussions. I feel very happy about seeing so many ongoing GI activities. I'm a lecturer in GIS and also have studied GI planning for a while from the University of Sheffield. We are very happy to see all kinds of benefits and functions provided by GI. And of course, we all want to maximize the benefits provided by GI, but in the process of implementation, we may come across make difficult decisions among trade-offs. I'm very eager to know did you observe some trade-offs of functions or anything you find extremely difficult in the process of GI planning and implementation? And from your perspective, I would really want to know how you see our urban GI planners and scholars could help in this process. Thank you.
Who wants to take?
It's a difficult question.
It's a difficult one, yeah?
I mean, as in Wales, we've had to recently do a green infrastructure impact assessment, and basically the planning department have had to undertake this. So they've had to look at what green infrastructure assets do we have. I think it's clarity in what we classify as green infrastructure, because when they were looking at it, not necessarily in the world of green infrastructure, they would say that a playing field was GI. Whereas in a biodiversity team, an amenity grassland isn't necessarily something which is beneficial to nature for us. And so it's that level of clarity and understanding as to what is wanted, what we would classify as green infrastructure, and when you're looking at what do you currently have, how is it beneficial to both people and nature? Because in green infrastructure, we're talking about the well-being of our biodiversity, the well-being of our climate, the well-being of the people who live in our spaces. yeah, I mean, we're trying to develop tools for planners now to help them. So green infrastructure guides and stuff like that. Planting guides, you know, so when you get asked what do you need to plant, it's going to ask the right people. So we have a really valuable local plant nursery, which it's wonderful in Swansea and Neath Talbot that uses local seeds and things like that. So it's recommending the right things as well, you know, like making sure that what we're putting in is right for the area. And it's asking those questions, even if the people who are putting planning applications in, they might not necessarily have the answers, but also of the teams that you have within the councils, you know, like the wildlife or the biodiversity teams, who are have that expertise to understand. And you know, every planning department has planning ecologists who are designed to do that. So it's using them to their best ability, I'd say.
Thank you. Yep.
Fantastic to hear what you've been doing. I just wanted to ask if you'd looked at integrating art into any of these projects to help with the sort of community engagement, and if so, how you selected artists and how you went about it.
Certainly in Falkirk we have got some really nice urban green sites where we have certainly integrated art. And a really good example is a local nature reserve that has a sort of history of industrial use in iron foundry and iron working. And the local school was involved in designing art to go into that site and did a whole lot of study in relation to the sort of history of it. And then actually identified a local foundry to manufacture the work, and were able to then visit the foundry and get involved in that, and that was fantastic. And actually for that site, the level of engagement in the site and interest in the site was really sort of boosted by the art and the school involvement. And once people were on the site, we could talk to them about the local nature reserve and the habitats and the species and all this sort of stuff. But actually, it was the art that got people involved, and it's the art that they see from the road, and it's the art that continues to instill this sort of stewardship of the site by the local community. So it's invaluable to have that. And so we do try to.
Was it like an open call, or how did you kind of initiate it?
In that instance, it wasn't. It was an artist and foundry that we'd worked with before and that we felt was particularly suited to this particular site and to working with schools. But in other instances, it would be put out as a sort of call to tender for art.
I think we will take one or maybe two, or maybe three last questions, okay? But let's keep, we'll try to keep the response as brief as possible.
Yeah, thanks very much. Tom Young from the Environment Partnership. Beth, you talked a little bit about funding opportunities. I just thought it might be quite useful to maybe go through in a bit more detail the actual types of funding that you as councils kind of have available to you, the kind of process you actually have to go through to get it, and what is a good level of funding and what's a realistic level of funding that you have available. Thanks, Tom.
I feel like that's mirrored to the conversation that we had earlier. So like I said, we're an entirely grant-funded team. The wildlife team in Neath Talbot Council has 5 core funded members, and it's a team of 15. So, and there's a couple of projects that are grant-funded. So initially, we were brought on through European Rural Development Fund. That was scoped to be a really good grant, so it's supposed to be 3 years long. It ended up, because of lockdown, actually being only 1.5 years. But that was a big multi-partnership project across Swansea, Carmarthenshire, multi-million pound, and that was, a really good long length of funding stream. But in order to, the hoops that we had to jump through to get that, the application process was very difficult. And if anybody in this room has ever experienced WEFO, which is the Welsh and European funding portal, well done. The bureaucracy and the hoops and the fact that we had to prove the money that we'd spent, we had to show bank statements for how much money we'd spent, all of these things made it really difficult. And I was the lead project manager on that project, and I would say that 40% of that grant was me administrating it. So it's really difficult as a council. You want to make these changes and you end up spending a lot of your time managing these grants. Now we're looking at much more piecemeal pots of funding. So The lottery is a really good funder and much more simple, very friendly. We've got SPF. In Wales, we've got a scheme called the Local Places for Nature scheme, which is Welsh Government funded, and they allot money to each individual council every year. And then there's lots of other grants coming out through Welsh Government as well. There's the Coastal Project, which we've recently been awarded. There's the Challenge Fund. But there, again, because of the nature of the funding that's coming out at the moment, everything is much more piecemeal. It's much more small-scale grants that are, financial year to financial year. They're not long. And if we were looking to do a larger grant, it would be with somebody like the lottery or something like that who are, funding these larger projects. I don't know whether you guys want to add to that.
I would say the lotteries a good funder, but both lotteries, both sort of the big lottery and the Heritage Lottery Fund are good funders. And I think one of the challenges is with the funding climate, as you've talked about, sort of piecemeal. It's trying to have put together a program of change where you can, where it is kind of piecemeal steps, you're only going to get piecemeal funding. But I think other opportunities are being a facilitator to enable communities to access the various sort of building society, bank, foundation type trusts. And I think there's something about kind of working with them and facilitating those. In fact, in our school survey, one of the biggest challenges schools said they had in terms of making the changes they wanted to deliver was funding. So we're setting up a sort of mechanism to support schools with that journey.
Yeah, perfect. I think you can take the discussions further in the refreshment time. I think we got 1 and 2. Yeah, maybe you go on this one and then the last one on this. Okay, so maybe you go ahead first. Yeah, please.
Okay. Hello, I'm Alan from Forth London. I run a climate tech and net zero development company. How can the private sector engage more with the councils? We find it hard to engage with you guys, and we do have the fundings available for these developments.
I mean, I'll go first if you want me to. I feel like I'm talking a lot, so I'm trying to not. Yeah, I agree, it is really difficult. So within our council specifically, we have a business support team who work with local businesses, and we're trying, in terms of biodiversity and green infrastructure and action, to work through them to support local businesses. So in particular, we did an engagement study on the coastline, how to engage with businesses and people on the coastline, because people in Port Talbot use the beach so regularly, but just use it as a kind of amenity site, not necessarily understanding the habitat and the importance of that habitat. And one of the big things that came out of that engagement study was using local businesses to spread that word and that information and that knowledge. And so the grant that I just mentioned that we'd won, which is called Coastal Connections, a big part of that is doing this kind of business support service aspect where we approach local businesses to almost try and help them improve their biodiversity impact, help them improve their impact to the coastline. And so I think it's as much as you reaching out to us as us reaching out to you. I would say that the council probably is in a constant state of firefighting, and so it's difficult for that conversation to come out of the fact that everybody's just dealing with the day-to-day. But we're really trying to look at the way that we engage with local communities, and local businesses is a big part of that. And one of the presenters earlier, who I can't see in the room now, did say the exact same thing, that a lot of the grey space in local community is business-owned. It's either people's gardens or it's businesses. And so in terms of the way that we're looking, we really need to access that grey space to improve the whole urban space for nature and for people and for climate. And so that's really important. And I think if you guys can try and lead the way in that as well as businesses, and realise that you have a responsibility to do that, we can hopefully all work together to make it a greener future. But
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So one kind of theme that I've noticed is echoing throughout a lot of presenters today is the community engagement, and as you've mentioned earlier, that majority of the people that do participate often with younger children. I think it's kind of I don't know, you call it interest in nature is kind of infantilized to a certain aspect where people think of it as a nice thing to do with their children, but not necessarily something to continue as an adult. And I think partially the lack of community engagement is also on the other side of we're so busy, we have our individual capacity to participate in our community is very limited, and that's why we're in situations where you're kind of forced to do things. When you reach, when you attempt to consult the public, they don't participate. You do the thing, and then they start complaining, and you just you just show up and tell us your opinion. So I was just wondering, I think that's the kind of like a core issue, is that how do we access like working age adults, I suppose, as a community? And I was just wondering, is there any kind of means of engagement that you've seen as successful, or is this something you just, are reaching out for kind of like suggestions, I suppose?
I think we've had some success where we've looked beyond the sort of obvious usual suspects to consult on a green infrastructure project. So looked beyond, as you say, the families and the kids and the schools and the groups that obviously have an interest in nature, and looked to other established sort of community groups or groupings within that particular location. So where we can then reach out to, men's sheds or health and well-being groupings within the community, that hopefully will be pulling in some of those different demographics that you're talking about. But it's challenging, particularly when you've got limited time and resources to consult. It's tempting to go to the usual suspects because often they're the easy ones to sort of find and have conversations with. But that's not to say we shouldn't be trying to rise to that challenge. I think I would come back to you and say, as potentially one of those groups that it's harder to have those conversations with, tell us how you would like to have those conversations and how best we can talk to you about the projects we want to deliver.
Yeah, so I think we need to wrap the session in the interest of time, but there will be further opportunity to engage with our panelists during the breaks and during the reception time. But just to say that the couple of things I could see from all the discussions. So one of the thread is funding. I believe that this is something which is needed, and there is quite a, it's an area where there is a lot more possible could help to do the things which the councils and individuals and the groups want to do in the communities. I like really the idea, which I am personally quite supportive of, the DIY, because the fact is that if you wanted to do the things at the bigger scale, it becomes very easy actually when the people have got the opportunity to put certain things by themselves, because that allows them to replicate those solutions without really spending lots on them, which is possibly not in the top priority of most people there. The one thing I really liked about that was the one size does not fit all. So the bespoke solutions are very important. So not try to force actually the solutions which might not work at one place. Otherwise it would look like, I'm wearing a sock on my head rather than wearing a cap. So that's really important actually. The other thing, I think I really like the point actually which you all made, is the honesty is the best policy and keeping the communications clear. Because as was rightly made the point that when you're doing the new things, you really don't know whether this is going to be successful or not. But the intentions are pure, and they are to do the right things. So if the thing doesn't come out the way you anticipate, it means that you should not stop trying, because otherwise you will not do the innovation, you will not do the new things. So keeping the communication clear and expectations, managing the expectations, I think is the best thing to do. So thank you very much for all your insightful discussions and sharing your experiences. Can we give a big round of applause to our